A very good morning to you and welcome to our live broadcast of the Situation Room Uganda. We're coming to you live from the Protea Hotel. And this morning we're discussing internal democratic processes in Uganda's political parties and their implications on the 2016 general elections. We have a panel, an esteemed panel, a lady and gentlemen who will be taking us through this roundtable discussion. We have a great audience here, including party presidents. I can imagine the discussion that will be going on. But we'll be really examining the internal democratic practices within Uganda's political parties and organizations, with a specific reference to the just concluded NRM primaries, and I must add the FDC primaries, and their overall implication to both the 2016 general elections, as well as the country's pursuits for democratic governance. So may I introduce my panel? And of course, next to me, on my immediate left, Edgar Tabaro, who is a law don. Edgar, thank you so much for joining us. Also with us, another lawyer, Ellison Karuhanga. Next to him is the youngest party president, Asuman Basalira, President, Germa Party. And finally, Helena Okiring, who is a youth advocacy and engagement resource person. All right, so let's kick off this debate. I want to begin with you, Ellison, and for no particular reason, honestly. We saw what happened a few weeks ago with the NRM primaries. And just a few days ago, we saw what happened in the FDC party. Just as a player in the industry, because you're a citizen, you're a voter. I'm hoping you have a voter's card. What does this tell of our democracy? Because 30 plus years on, we still seem to be struggling with our own internal democracies and party democracies, if we were to go by what happened in the NRM and the FDC. What really then is the problem? Are we not ready for this multi-party dispensation that has been with us for some time? Or, if I may ask, are we just not prepared always?
Thank you, Maurice. Thank you, all of you, and greetings from me. Also greetings to my co-panelists, my distinguished co-panelists. I start off with a very hard question. What is wrong with internal democracy in parties? I think that political parties in this country, political pluralism in Uganda is actually not very old. It is not very old. Even if you started from 1960, from the late 50s and early 60s, and moved through the decades, I think political pluralism has suffered its own very serious setbacks in Uganda. I think in 1969 or thereabout, there was a statutory instrument banning political parties. I think around 67, there was a complete crossover of the opposition side in parliament to the government. I think in the 1980s, we also saw a large number of MPs crossing the floor. So the multi-party dispensation, which was introduced in 2005, seemed to be introduced focusing on the challenges of the early 60s and the late 50s and the 80s, because in the 70s we didn't have any pluralistic politics in Uganda. And if you look at our constitution, for example, there will be a focus on, or even our laws, there will be a focus on MPs crossing the floor to deal with what happened in the 60s. There will be a focus on not having tribal parties. There will be a focus on political parties having a national character. And then there's also the requirement that parties must have internal democracy. But I think if you take the example of the NRM, the primaries the NRM has just concluded are the second time the NRM as a political organization is holding universal adult suffrage primaries. The first time being in 2010. In 2005, I think there were electoral colleges. There was no universal adult suffrage. The same, I think, with FDC. I think what we saw with FDC, particularly in Soroti, is I think a similar thing. I don't even think FDC has ever actually had adult suffrage primaries. I think we saw the problems they had in Soroti. And you must understand the challenge of an adult suffrage election. The Ugandan Electoral Commission has had and updated a voters register since 1993. since 1993, but that register has had its problems and has had its challenges in the courts. Our political organizations are having registers. I don't think there's a party that has had a full register of its members in the last year. The NRM, at least the new team at the NRM Electoral Commission, started off with a register for historical reasons. So I think that's some of the challenges. But I think that effort has gone in. I think that we'll see improved processes. I'm sure very soon we'll also be seeing universal adult suffrage primaries in Jema and all other political organizations. But I don't think it's all bad to write home about. I think work has been done by the political players.
Thank you, Elson. You written a paper, and just to share one or two things. You mentioned in your paper, you do quote Reverend Jesse Jackson after losing his primaries of an American political setting, of course, gave a brilliant speech to the DNC, where, and I will quote, as you did here, America is not like a blanket, one piece of unbroken cloth, the same color, the same texture, the same size. America is more like a quilt, many patches, many pieces, many colors, many sizes, all woven and held together by a common thread. Now, the same can be said, you say, for Uganda and indeed our different political parties. They don't consist of identical members. Pluralism recognizes strength in diversity. I'll go to you, Asuman. Do you agree with your lawyer friend, Orlando friend, that the NRM did actually, in his view, and if I had him right, do well given the circumstances? Given the circumstances, and you said because we are a young democracy in terms of multi-party dispensation, but also in terms of adult suffrage at the party level, and you can give it to the NRM for having what, over 10 million registered voters, 60,000 polling stations, and more than the Electoral Commission, Asman. The FDC has lesser members, of course, and lesser polling stations, so he probably has a point.
Well, I think the challenge we have in this country with regard to multi-party politics is actually not what you're talking about, not what Karuhanga is talking about. You see, having many polling stations, being a young democracy, I don't think so. The challenge we have has to do with the attitude of the leaders. In fact, the history of this country, multipartyism has suffered because of the attitude of the leaders. In the 60s, when parties were banned, and even in the 70s and the 80s, the very same reasons that President Obote just gave to justify banning political parties are the very same reasons that Amin used, are the very same reasons that Mr. Museveni used. That parties were divisive, and were built along tribal and religious shenanigans, similar sentiments. That's why when Mr. Museveni came to power, the first thing he did, as Edson has said, was to ban political parties. Legal notice number 1 of 1986. Okay? Yes. Legal notice number 2. Yes. So one of the laws, the point I'm making is that one of the laws that Mr. Museveni's regime enacted had to do with banning political parties. Even at the opening up in 2005, you recall the statements that Mr. Museveni said, let's open up to the Jeko. For us, we will remain with our movement. Those who don't want the movement should go away. And actually even said that one of the reasons he was opening up was that whenever he went abroad, he would be asked about, pluralism. So Mr. Museveni did not open up because he believes in multipartyism. And I'm not surprised that when you look at the Penal Code Act, there are still restrictive provisions on associational freedoms. And that has been even exacerbated by the enactment of the Public Order Management Act. So if we don't address the attitude, the mentality of our leaders, if our leaders don't appreciate that parties are strong institutions of democracy, that they can deliver democracy in this country, we are going to suffer the same fate. I don't even agree with this, the notion that you see multipartyism in this country is very young. These challenges are bound to occur. I don't want us to criminalize or to make it appear wrong to be young. It is possible for a young person to do constructive things, okay? The NRM, for example, has been in power for 30 years. Even when it evolved as a political party, it continues to enjoy, state privileges. So the mistakes of other parties, the challenges in other parties can be excusable. The challenges in the NRM with regard to their party primaries, in my view, are inexcusable. They have had the resources, and nobody knows how they get them, by the way. If you went to the Electoral Commission and asked for accountability of NRM resources, you'll not get it. So they have the resources. They have the state at its disposal. You would expect that a party in power operates very differently. And they should be borrowing experiences from what happens in the CCM, in the ANC, the challenges we see here. How can a party have different registers? You recall the other day, the complaints in Butambala. One of the candidates had a register, another one also had a register, okay? For the same election, for the same party. Now, those mistakes are inexcusable. You don't do such things if you're a party in power. So for me, I think it's not real about us being young. It's not about multipartyism being young. I think the bigger question is about the attitude and mentality of our leaders. Once we appreciate that parties have a role to play, then all these hindrances, legal, political, structure, will be eliminated, and I think this country is capable of flourishing as a multi-party democracy.
I disagree. You cannot blame the president for the chaos, for example, in UPC, where there's a president, another president, a court case, a throwing out in Uganda House. That cannot be the fault of the president. You cannot blame the president for the political primaries that the Democratic Party had in Katomi, where there was Lukwago the other side. You cannot blame the president for the chaos in Soroti and the FDC primaries. The fact that the challenges are across, and you cannot say, for example, that NRM has been in power 30 years. DP has been in existence since 1954. UPC has been in existence, maybe in the 50s. UPC has been in existence as well since, I think, the early 60s. You cannot put down the problem of pluralism to President Museveni. I think if we continue to start diagnosing symptoms, we will die of diseases. We need to look at it wider. Then when you talk about the NRM opening up so people can go, political parties in this country under the NRM were suspended and there was an individual merit system. Then the system was opened up. Whatever reason it was opened up for, it was opened up. And the challenge on people organizing their parties, the fact that it's not that being young is bad, but the fact that there's little experience to borrow from is something we need to acknowledge.
Edgar, I really wanted you to come in. But Asman and Ellison have a ping pong based on party structures and looking at the law, existing law. And I think, of course, Asuman blaming the one person who's been at the helm for the last years. Let's make an assessment of the political space. You have political party that in the last election went to the ballot under multi-party dispensation. But you will have a situation, and Asuman, you'll agree with me, where we had candidates, members of parliament, who belonged to a political party. And I'll give you an example of Jack Sabiti, who in his constituency knew that that was a stronghold of the NRM. And he campaigned saying, please elect me as your member of parliament, and you're free to elect your own president. Decide your president. And he could have gone on and said, please elect Dr. Kizza Besigye. He didn't. But he was very clear. Please vote for me, and with the president, you can decide who you will vote for. Clearly, any party in this country would bring you to discipline based on the grounds. That clearly tells me there is a weakness in our structure. Then it's not Jack Sabiti, it's just an example. There are many other MPs who campaigned as individuals and not as members of a political party?
I think, as it were, would need to situate the problem in its proper place. I've listened very carefully to my learned friends' submissions on the matter, and I, with the greatest respect, would like to disagree with them. I'm going to be a little hard in the manner in which I speak, since we've got some intimidating personalities around, like Honorable John Ken Luchamuzi, the man. I hope I live up to his expectations. Now, I think the biggest challenge we have in our politics, Asmani alluded to it as being attitude. I would like to go much further and define it in more terms and say that it is impunity. We've got impunity in our politics. And you did mention Jack Savit, and I was very happy you brought out Richiga County. Richiga County is one of the flashpoints, right from 1996, or 94 for that matter, during the CA elections. And if you look at wherever we have had the challenges of violence, multiple, what do they call it? What are these electoral officers? Multiple staffing? You know, some of these words have changed meaning all over the years by tabloidization of our media. But, you know, multiple voting and multiple what? Staffing. All the flashpoints that we've had this time around have a history to it. Year in, year out, right from the 1990s. These are the very places where we've been having electoral what? Violence. Rushenyi County. I'm going to be careful not to mention names because we're on national television and we could attract defamation suits. But I think the names are very clear. If you go back in time, if you went to Google and type certain names, you'll see the same names associated with the violence of the 90s. Honorable John Ken Luchamuzi was in Parliament, in the 7th Parliament. You were thrown out of the 8th one, unfairly though, by the 7th Parliament. You had a select committee on violence, investigating violence, and there's a report on election violence arising from that what? And there are concrete proposals that were made from that what? From that investigation. What came of it? Did we take any action? And we see the same process being repeated. So if we are to plot a trajectory, if we are to plot a trajectory of what is happening in our democratization process, we are promoting impunity at the expense of anything else. Not so. Then there is the law. You have a DPC handling a matter in which is this region after between Mbarara and Masaka? Luengo. That's Ruizi, Ruizi region. Honorable Asuman has experience with the Ruizi. But you hear the RPC, is it RPC or DPC? RPC saying that, no, we had minor offenses of assault, stuffing of ballot papers. No, this is an RPC referring to such electoral offenses as what? Minor. So the mindset, the mindset or the attitude is that of what? Impunity. Is that of what? Impunity. So the question would be, what do we need to do? What do we need to do to arrest this impunity? In another scenario, you have an MP with 100 million shillings at the back of his vehicle. And he parks his vehicle at a washing bay. I mean, that's just an example that made it to the what? To the mainstream media. We also hear many other stories. An accident scene and the accident scene causes inflation in the demand pool inflation in the area. And mind you, we do have laws that govern money laundering. We have laws that govern what? Money laundering. Such monies in a boot at a washing bay where man is watching a game, a premiership game between Man U and Arsenal, I mean, would ordinarily attract the financial intelligence what? Authority. But the mere fact that this authority has not even taken interest in that, to investigate the source of that money, points to a wider what? A wider problem. And I beg to submit, ladies and gentlemen, this applies across the board. Whether we introduced multipartyism the other day or much earlier, the question has to do with impunity. And I implore each one of us here, particularly those of us who are involved in the civil society, to begin addressing the issue of impunity. Then the rest, whether we are young in democracy or mature, or whether we are maturing, or whether we are going to leapfrog, if we arrest impunity, then we shall have taken a major step towards achieving full democracy in this country.
Thank you, Edgar. I would want the microphone turned to Helena, because there's the only lady on the panel. Helena, I want to hear your input on the state of the affairs in our political parties. Clearly, there is a financial constraint with some political parties, not the ruling party, because recently members of parliament, or those who are aspiring to contest for members of parliament and other seats within the party during the primaries, had to let go of some money, which did raise a good chunk of money for the party. And the money that could have been used again to have a clean process in the primaries. Maybe that's another point of argument. The other parties will claim, even with the money given to them by the Electoral Commission, that again will not suffice for the activities these political parties undertake during this electoral period. Let's look at the issues affecting the political parties. Is it our young democracy, or is it the leadership? Sometimes we do not mix the two. Should we separate them, or are they actually intertwined?
Okay, thank you very much, Maurice, and the rest of the panel. Good morning, and everyone here, good morning. First of all, a lot has been said, and for me, there are two issues really I would like to zero in response. One, first of all, I think it's important we appreciate the implications, of not having active political parties vis-a-vis the individual merit system. When you have close to 15 years of organizing around individuals, so people are in parliament or they are leaders because of who they are as individuals, society moves away from organizing around ideas to organizing around individuals. Now, when you take that society back, okay, to a political party system or multi-party systems that are supposed to be organized around ideas, there's a push and pull that plays out in what we see, or in, whether it's what we saw in FDC with, we go from Kiza Besigye to Mugisha Muntu, then back to Kiza Besigye, because I have been in the trenches, or in the NRM, where you have a sole candidate, but you also have a party manifesto. That pull between individuals and ideas is what we see, whether it's what Edgar calls impunity, or the different things I think we see in parties. For me, are that crisis. We have not yet come to the level where we are organizing parties around ideas. So when we are FDC, with the exception of GEMA and UPC, and for GEMA, it's even in their initials. I know it's justice, it's education, really the idea of what GEMA represents. As to whether that has trickled down is another thing, but the idea of what that party stands for, and people organizing or mobilizing around that idea as opposed to the individuals, is a very, very significant factor in our politics today, and it plays out. And I think it's important that we understand that. So when you see primaries going haywire and we're excusing all sorts of behavior, we're excusing that behavior because it favors a certain individual. We are not asking, so how does ballot stuffing affect FDC? We're not, how does this compromise the idea of what FDC stands for. So for me, that conflict is very important because we see it play out very many times. The second question you asked was around political party financing. You know, when you also have a culture where politicians literally become rent seekers, there are very many trade-offs that happen. So parties, for example, I don't want to use the example of the NRM because the NRM is not a party. They're very clear. They are an organization. So it's a bit unfair. You cannot talk about political parties and talk about the NRM. It is an organization and operates as such, and it happens to be in power. Okay. So I'll look at the other parties. I think for about 10 years or so, parties were not allowed to run, offices at different levels where they could collect subscription fees. Okay, so when you're not able to collect subscription fees, what that means, the value that subscription fees, for example, bring is not even the fact that it gives the party money, but it creates a stake. Okay, if I am giving my money to a party, I take keen interest, what are these representatives doing? What is the agenda of the party? Is our idea being represented in parliament? Okay, money is about creating a stake. When we finance our parties, we are able to hold the leaders to account. But, just by show of hands, if you're registered in a party here we give out party cards for free, I mean, we sell, some parties sell, but, there's the culture, you give out party cards for free, or if you sell, it is so cheap, there's no impetus for me to follow up. So you create a situation where people have no stake, and when you want them to come and vote, you can buy them, and it creates a lot of distortions in how we relate with and to power. It creates a lot of distortions in how parties are financed, Financing should primarily come from the membership. Because when it comes from the membership, they are able to hold their leaders to account. In the absence of that, I am the one buying you fuel. So, all the things that we see end up happening. So for me, those are the two things. The context between, the conflict between individual merit and idealism, and the challenge of political party financing.
All right, thanks, Helena. Let me return to you, Ellison, because many people have suggested, given the privileged position of NRM as an organization, since Helena has actually set the record straight, as an organization, the party should be, and I don't know why I'm saying you, but Ellison, you should be setting the benchmarks for the political parties. When it comes to financing, the party collected a lump sum during the primaries, during the process of registration. In terms of setting parameters and rules of play within the party, the other parties should actually be picking a leaf. And you, as a party, NRM as a party, should be picking a leaf from CCM, as Asuman was saying, because some of these are the oldest parties in the region. But clearly, the result from the primaries, given what we saw in the primaries, and the petitions that are coming for now, clearly says something different. That things, even within the party, or the organization, are not well. And what then do you expect? As you mentioned, UPC, you mentioned FDC, you mentioned the other political parties. What then do you expect for such an organization like Asuman's that received very limited money from government because they have one member of parliament in the House, and it was based on representation in the House? What then do you expect him to do? He cannot hold adult suffrage at the party level. He's then forced to hold a delegates conference to elect his leaders, the same as the Democratic Party, the same as FDC, and you have not set the right benchmarks.
Okay. Your question had a lot in it. Regarding money, you have to put money and organizing primaries into context. The Electoral Commission is organizing national elections, and I think the budget is about 440 billion shillings to organize these elections. The budget that has been appropriated or that I think has been applied for by the Electoral Commission for these elections is 440 billion shillings. The NRM organized primaries on literally the same scale with a budget of about 5.5 billion shillings. You have to put, when you talk about money, there is certainly a financial problem in the parties, and a lot of that money was collected from aspirants. A lot of that money was collected from aspirants. So the Electoral Commission, and then the NRM constitution provided that the polling, the center of the party shall be the branch, so the polling unit was the village. In Uganda, the Electoral Commission sets its polling stations, so the Electoral Commission may have one polling station for 4 villages, while the NRM constitution and the election which went into, and they ended up having to have a polling station for each village. So the NRM would have about 60,000 polling stations, while the National Electoral Commission would have about 18,000. So when you're talking about the organization of the primaries, because a lot of the challenges in the primaries were twofold. Firstly, you had a problem, really administrative problems. Administrative problems, late arrival of electoral materials, some places not getting ballot papers in time, candidates missing on the ballot papers. There were clear administrative problems, and some of them really were errors and they are not acceptable, but there were administrative challenges. The second challenge you had was that the type of politics that politicians were engaging themselves in order to get elected, what Edgar calls impunity. The behavior of political actors is also a large part of the problem, and it's a problem across the political spectrum. You cannot say that the behavior of actors, but on this issue because we have to lift the level of the debate to look at the problems bedeviling our parties. I agree to an extent with Helena that we had an individual merit system of people organizing around individuals. I don't think that parties necessarily represent ideas, unfortunately. I don't know the fundamental disagreement, for example, between the Conservative Party and JEMA. Why can't they be in one party? What is the different idea between the Conservative Party? The man has warned me. the man has warned me. But I don't know that there is this fundamental disagreement that JEMA sees that parties should be run in a certain way, and that the country should be run in one way, and CP sees it should be run in another way. Another thing is that parties have a lot of platitudes in terms of ideas. People say truth, that for them they are the party of truth. Now, who is the party of lies? Who starts a party to lie? Well, someone is saying UPC, but that's not true. That's not true. Nobody starts a party to lie. Nobody starts. So the idea that parties necessarily represent ideas, because in this country, many of the parties were, Osman said that the reasons of Bote ban, the reasons Amin ban, the reasons of Museveni ban, but those reasons were there. Many parties were organized around religion in many parts of this country. So the idea that, also the idea of financing and membership. You know, if you really look around the world, the trend of people paying money to political parties or holding membership cards has reduced across the globe. In the United Kingdom, for example, the Conservative Party is financed mainly by big, rich donors, while the Labour Party is financed mainly by trade unions. And if you limit the law on trade union financing within the Labour Party, you may have a problem. But I think if you have millions of voters, for example, in the United Kingdom, I don't think you have thousands of individuals buying party cards. I mean, why really should a villager would ask himself, why should I pay you? Although he should, ideally. But so the idea that, I think the first thing that needs to happen is, as parties keep competing, as ideas keep coming up, as different people start standing for different things, you will see the line of, you will see the dividing line. I am actually I don't know if I'm overshooting. I'm actually happy with the with dividing lines. When people say, I stand for this and the other people stand for that, we are still at a level of where people's disagreement is that you're in power and I am not. You know, the difference between me and you is that you are the president. Someone asked, what is the difference between you and the other man? And said, the other one is the president. The difference must be more. The differences must be ideological. But the idea that parties necessarily organize around ideas, I think, is something that takes time. Like-minded people will eventually come together as contests continue and continue and continue. But at the beginning, to get around individuals was also correct for a certain period of time. I mean, it is that individual merit system that gave us fantastic MPs like the man, Honorable John Ken Muchamuzi. They were able to stand in their villages on their ideas. They used to have joint candidate rallies in those days, where the law was that you don't hold your rally, you don't raise your money, the government goes and organizes a rally for the three of you, and you stand there, you discuss, people ask you questions, after the questions are answered, they vote. And that's how you ended up having those individual merit parliaments are called, are remembered as much stronger parliaments, because people took ideas. So I think the parties building around individuals, eventually like-minded individuals will come together, and then you'll have ideological strengths. But it takes time, and the NRM is a party.
Asuman, Elena, you're out of order. Asuman, he starts us off on a good point, Ellison. Now we are looking at how we can then strengthen our legal infrastructure for better better activity within the political parties. So that's the question I want to ask you. What can we do, Asuman, to strengthen the legal institution framework for robust and internal democratic political organizations here in Uganda?
I think we have a problem in this country where we think, challenges must be resolved through legislation. As far as I'm concerned, that's a wrong concept. I'll give you an example. Uganda has some of the best anti-graft laws in the world, okay? And even institutions. But corruption is still here. Some of these countries with fewer cases of corruption don't have the laws we have here. So that means the problem lies elsewhere. It is only in this country where if you have a problem with Lukwago, as a person, you amend the KCCA law to address Lukwago. If you have a problem with roads, you have to create some road act or authority. That's not how things are done. So people who are talking about institutions, people who are talking about laws in Uganda are making a mistake. I want to go to the argument of my lecturer, Edgar, who taught me at law school. Impunity. Because you see, look at the laws we have in Uganda, the electoral laws. Consider the electoral laws. If we were respecting the electoral laws, inadequate as they may be, we would be making progress. But even the laws, the inadequate laws we have are not respected. So the number of institutions you make, the number of laws you enact will not be a solution. What we should be thinking about as a country is a culture of respect for the laws and institutions you have. And that even brings into issue the question of exemplary leadership. Once you have an exemplary leadership, and of course an assertive population, you see, people are messing up with us as a country because they think we are not assertive. It is only in Uganda where citizens will for a full year move around the country gathering views for reforms. Parliament ignores them and nothing happens. That can only happen in Uganda. It is only in Uganda where you wake up and fuel has increased astronomically and nothing happens. So those who are in leadership are looking at us as, a docile community. They want to do whatever they want to do with us. And if we don't address, and for me, that should be our focus, as political parties, as the elite, building the civic competence of the Ugandans. Once we have a population that puts leaders to accountability, once we have a population that asks questions, once we have a population that is assertive, we will not be having these problems. Countries that are democratic have, of course, enjoy that kind of population that is conscious, that is competent, that can question. Unfortunately, in this country, because we realize the potential of an enlightened citizenry, we don't do much in building that potential. For example, you find Electoral Commission is mandated to conduct civic education or voter education. Government deliberately does not give them the money to do that. Why? Because you see, you want to keep the population in that kind of darkness. Political parties that are also mandated to carry out that obligation, unfortunately, don't possess the necessary resources and infrastructure. So you have a population that does not ask questions. You have a population that is not assertive. So this impunity will go on. And I think we should not be talking about having new laws or new institutions. I want to agree we should be addressing the question of impunity. Let's first observe and respect the laws we have. Let's observe and respect the institutions we have. And out of that respect, we will be moving to the next phase. I don't think having more laws, having more institutions is in itself a panacea. You will have them, they will not be respected. I'll tell you, and my young brother here is a lawyer. You go to any police station in Kampala. I have been in police cells several times as a prisoner. Not a hardcore criminal, a political prisoner. Each time I'm in a police cell, I find people who have spent 2 months in a police cell. The Constitution talks about 48 hours. Okay? Just move in any police station in Kampala. Don't go to Bujiri where I come from. Just begin with the CPS, Central Police Station. And you know, the police is not bothered. You go to police, you are trying to secure somebody, to get bond for somebody who has been there for 2 weeks, and they are talking about, you know, orders from above. That is the country in which we are living. And for me, unless we address that fundamental issue of impunity, you will have the best laws. You will bring Edgar here, Edison here. They will draft the good laws. Those laws will be there. So the shift, the mindset in my view, and the priority in my view as a country collectively, this has nothing to do with Mr. Museveni or Asuman or Kendeman. The country should focus its efforts in addressing the issue of impunity. How best do we address respect for the rule of law, constitutionalism? That, in my view, will give us a mileage.
I know your lecturer wants to say something, but before he does, and I probably would want to disagree. We may not want national laws to set in place structures for us to operate, but we may want to have political party structures that allow us to operate and give us room as a citizenry, as Helena was saying, to have our leaders play by our rules and discuss, and we challenge the leaders to discuss the issues that affect us. But we must have those structures where we know what the citizenry must do, we know what the leaders must do. How do we get them into office? Can we be able to know that this political party organization, political party A, has a leadership that is elected through these structures, and for me then to present my views, and coming to you, Edgar, I have a structure through which I can do that. And Helena was mentioning, some political parties in this country do not have even grassroots structures. So you find a political party that does not have an office at a district level. I don't know if you, Basariro, you have representation in Kabale or Kisoro, my village in Kisoro, whether you have actually an office in Kisoro.
I thought Morris from Kisoro is Gema. I'm just learning it here that is something else. But I think more fundamentally, you again make a mistake. And these guys talk about the grand norm, you know, the superstructure, which is really the constitution and the enabling laws. Political parties have party constitutions, okay? But those party constitutions are subordinate to the Constitution, to the Political Parties and Organizations Act. Now, if you get it wrong at the level of the Constitution, if you get it wrong at the level of Political Parties and Organizations Act, don't expect miracles at the level of party constitutions. That's one. Number two, because we operate in a restrictive environment, you are talking about mobilization. And I don't want to lament, because you see, we appreciate this. Look at the political parties, look at the Public Order Management Act, because that is critical to us as political party, members and activists. You look at how restrictive that law is, and I'll just give you one example. You write to General Kaihura, okay, notifying him of your intended event. He's supposed to respond within 2-3 days. He does not respond. You go ahead, make announcements, book venues and the like. Then as you are moving towards the venue, okay, you receive a call. That function cannot take place. But he had all the time to reply, okay? We have instances where you have an intended activity in a hall, and the state is talking with the management of the hall not to allow. Because you see, under the Public Order Management Law, you must give consent. You must show proof that the owner of the venue has actually allowed you to be there. They are telling them, no, don't allow X, Y, and Z to be here. You are talking about building structures at the grassroots. When you have restrictive laws, you just look at the Penal Code Act and the powers of police. Look at the Public Order Management Law and the powers of police. And this entire concept of funding, for me to go to Kisoro, you don't know what it means in terms of resources. And the political party leaders here will tell you, literally the leaders fund activities of political parties, okay? I get money out of my legal practice, out of my law firm, to inject into GEMA activities. And I know it happens to Ken Deman, it happens to Dr. Silanda here, and the others. Simply because our colleagues in the NRM, who are represented here by my young brother Karuhanga, the NRM can afford to call a donor conference, okay? They'll create a list of business people in Kampala, and it is public. GEMA cannot. In fact, if a prominent business person is dreamt of supporting GEMA, you know what happens to him or her the next day in terms of revenue assessment, okay? In developed democracies, business communities take sides, okay? You'll find NTV saying, because GEMA stands for these values, we will support GEMA. In Uganda, it can't happen. It can't. Media organizations take sides. Business communities take sides. They actually engage in mobilizing resources. Here, it can only happen when you are dealing with the sole visionary, the Sabalwani. It cannot happen elsewhere. You don't know the sacrifices people make in this country to identify themselves as opposition leaders, as opposition activists. In my capacity, don't expect a corporate person to move into my law firm for legal representation. You identify with Basari, your business will be closed. So we end up dealing with small cases. Those who are brave enough to come to us are the ones we deal with. So you can imagine the environment we are talking about, very restrictive. And that's why, for me, I think when you address the issue of attitude, because you see, why should Mr. Museveni and the NRM be concerned at which corporate company is coming to my law firm? Why? Why should it be a problem? So the challenges are bigger. Now, as I said, this should not be a lamentation session. Once we appreciate all that, we have one responsibility: to ensure that we regain our power, our authority as Ugandans, and tell those who are responsible for running this country that this is the red line. This is the Rubicon. Please don't cross this. And that's the struggle some of us are engaged with. Just to tell the country, to tell Ugandans that, you see, if we are to move from level A to level B, we should not allow our leaders to do X, Y, and Z. So having appreciated that, I think the country will be able to put the leaders in order. It cannot be the other way as it's happening now.
Thanks, Asuman. I had someone mention that, so you must be offering pro bono services at your legal firm. I will ask you.
There is a book that was launched at the 60th anniversary of the Democratic Party, authored by the veteran politician Dr. Paulo Kawanga Semagere, Reality Check, Political Party Financing in Uganda. It's an extensive study on political party, the history, and it tries to problematize the Political Organizations Act of 2010, and draws very heavily from models elsewhere: South Africa, Sweden, Federal Republic of Germany, UK, and the United States. And of course, you'll agree with me that Dr. Semogere has his place firmly established in the history of what would we call it? Freedom fighting? We tend to think freedom fighting involves going to the bush. But Dr. Kawanga Semogere is a very distinguished personality. Some of these things that we are taking so much for granted today, like pluralism, Semogere gained through court. Him with Zakalo Room, you remember the 1999 petitions in the Constitutional Court. You know, when I was teaching constitutional law, constitutional history, I had to be very specific on the case that Semogere filed, because from '79 he has been at this job, filing constitutional case after what? Constitutional case. And some of these freedoms that we are talking about, the opening up of the political space, came as a result of the struggle of Semogere, and even John Ken Lucham was here. Although at one time his was a personal battle to save his to save his seat in Parliament, but it had implications for the rest of us and the discourse and processes we are going through. But to address more specifically the issues at hand in respect to impunity and what have you, respect for the law. I mean, it's human nature. If you are not regulated, or if regulation is not brought into your face, you're very likely to meander into the journey of impunity. So what am I bringing to the fore? What is the space of civil society? What must civil society do to hold our leaders accountable? Because we have agreed that there's some law in place, some kind of law that regulates how these things should be done. And the same law can actually be what? Reformed. So what do we need to do as civil society to hold our leaders accountable? And I'm going to propose very hard, should I use the word hardcore? Hardcore solutions to the malaise that is afflicting us. Electoral violence. I mean, if you see the images of the recipients of the violence, is it the recipients? Those on whom the violence is occasioned. I mean, the victims of violence. I mean, you've organized an election. I've presented myself. The Constitution gives us the leeway to choose from our free will. Then you come and inflict pain on me. And you think you're complying with the Constitution? You call us what? Mad? That is your opinion. I don't know what that means. But furthermore, you're injecting billions of money in a populace. Well, depending on whose figures you're reading. If you're reading the government figures, it's 19% of the people of our population living below the poverty line. And if you are reading GEMA's statistics, they may talk of up to 34%. But anyways, we have an impoverished population. And you're injecting monies to buy or to fetter with their free will, what then are you doing with the electoral process? And there are laws to curtail this. I've already mentioned that violence, electoral violence has been with us since the 90s, 94, 96. I mean, he's reminding me of the 60s, but I'm always reminded that Uganda started about 30 years ago. For those of us who are young, you know. Before that, there was no Uganda. Uganda started existing in the civilized world in 1986. Before that, there were backward elements who were running this country. That's what we are told. I'm here to go into that history. I'll study it after here. But I would like to deal with the civilized elements that were running our country. And we need to remind them that they took oath in 1986, promising this and that, and we must hold them to that oath. So how are we going to do it? I'm one of the supporters of the processes of the ICC, International Criminal Court. I know they've been labeled anti-African, neo-colonialist, imperialist. I don't know which other adjectives they ascribe to the institution. But I wish to submit that if the ICC is a racist body, then it is a human face of racism. Because this is the kind of racism we have been looking for. The one that holds accountable and ends impunity. Now, if the ICC processes cannot take care of this, there's the anti-torture act. Not even the grand, at the international level, treaty. There's a treaty. And the beauty about that treaty, it treats torture as a crime of international jurisdiction. We have had some convictions